All right, welcome everybody to the Lakers Legacy podcast, where the Lakers season is nigh, and it looks like the franchise is ready to paint the town red. Nay, make that paint the town red dick. JJ, that is. Because the Coach podcast era is officially here. I'm your host, Jonathan Hernandez, and I'm joined by my co host, Tommy Alexander. And Tommy, the JJ Redick press tour has begun 1 week out from training camp. First, with Zach Lowe on the Lowe podcast yesterday, where he unofficially announced the Lakers starting lineup for the beginning of the 2024-25 season. And then, of course, today he had his official State of the Lakers Union address with Rob Pelinka, where we found out quite a bit, actually, amidst all of the typical fluff. But for today's episode, why don't we kind of just do a free flowing sort of episode the entire way through and ping pong back and forth on what points stood out to us about JJ? Ping pong back and forth on what points stood out to us about whatever JJ Redick or Rob Pelinka mentioned. But I will tee you up first with this topic, and because it's something that we talked about offline. But what are your thoughts about JJ Redick's transparency right off the bat regarding his revelation of the starting unit even before training camp has gotten underway, and him getting out ahead of things, and yeah, doing so on the low Zach Lowe podcast? Like, were you one of those fans who was like, well, this is weird, he kind of seems like he jumped the gun, training camp hasn't even started, like, wouldn't you want to have these players sort of battle it out with each other? Did he even consider Jared Vanderbilt? I mean, now we know why he didn't why he didn't consider Jared Vanderbilt, which we'll get to in a second. But yeah, what are your thoughts first on the JJ Redick's revelation of the 2024-25 starting lineup being essentially the same starting lineup that closed 2023-24 with D'Angelo Russell, Austin Reeves, Rui Hachimura, LeBron James, and Anthony Davis?
So I think as a general matter, I view transparency as confidence in this context. I think one of the issues with the prior coaches, right? I'm going to borrow from, Anthony Irwin and others have discussed this online. Darvin Ham and Frank Vogel. I'll loop in Frank Vogel with this too, because he wasn't the most transparent at times. But Darvin Ham and Frank Vogel almost like treated this who was going to be in the starting five as though they were carrying like the nuclear codes, right? It was like always this weirdly overly secretive issue with them. And I think like I don't know why they were viewing it that way. It's like, it comes across as, it's almost like somebody's trying to give you the impression that they're being secretive, or they're being strategic in their secrecy. And I just, in hindsight, I think the truth comes out. And I think the truth was they just didn't know what they were doing, right? Or they didn't know what to do. They didn't have a good reason. At the time they were asked, they didn't have an answer. And what I like about Redick, right, is he seems confident, and I think his transparency shows that confidence. But he also seems willing to adjust. And, he's not going to say, this is the starting five. If they start 0-10, I'm just going to dig my heels in further because I have, these great reasons for why I chose them. He's just saying this is, straight up, right? And people can say he's kind of a jerk, or, people he's not as soft in how he presents some facts. Frankly, he's not as soft as others because I think he's smarter than a lot of other people that he's talking to a lot in these situations. But I think he said this I'm going with the lineup that went 23-10 last season. Projecting that out, that's a phenomenal record, and let's see what they can do. And it's sort of, let's cut the nonsense. We're going to play our best players. And if we deduce after playing our best players that if for some reason it's in fact not the best idea to play our best players, we'll adjust and we'll, tinker with the lineups and tinker with the rotations. And so I think coming in and saying this is our starting five shows a confidence, and it shows confidence not just to me as a fan, but if I was a player, I would also feel like, you can say don't you want Rui and Vando to even if assuming Vando was healthy, right? Don't you want Rui and Vando to have that extra fire and compete with each other? I just these guys are professional athletes. They've been dealing with that fire their whole life. And I think people were really I mean, trivializing like how these guys are, you know, how they're going to react to certain situations. That not everything has to be some Phil Jackson mind game. You know what I mean? It's like at the end of the day, let's just play our best players and let's live with the consequences of that and adjust as needed. And I think it's the perfect messaging, and it's the kind of messaging that's so common sense. I feel like Laker fans reacting to this are like they don't even know how to take it because we had so many. I mean, like a decade, right? I mean, you can go back to Byron Scott, Luke Walton. We've had a decade of like coaches just sort of feeding us platitudes and random, sort of line like in like statements that are open to interpretation that we just don't even know how to react now as fans when somebody just tells us what their plan is. You know what I mean? It's like, but we should be appreciating that, and I certainly do.
Yeah, definitely. But yeah, no, I totally agree with you with regards to starting off this season with some intuitive common sense. That's a good place to start, regardless of how obvious things seem to be with this starting lineup announcement. Although some Lakers fans don't think it's obvious and immediately point to, but this lineup is such a defensive liability, et cetera, and poking holes at what it can't do versus seeing, versus looking at things with a, I mean, I understand why fans wouldn't look at this season with a glass half full perspective given the stagnant off season. But I don't know, some fans like to be miserable. That's their prerogative. But that said, I think you said something offline that really resonated with me. And you put things perfectly when you said, it seems like on paper, the Galaxy Brain era is over for now. Play your best players, work around their deficiencies, work with what you have, and then prepare and adjust accordingly every step along the way as you garner more data. Don't tightly project your preconceived notions onto the team right off the bat. And I think what fans are missing is exactly what you said. They think that because JJ Redick has come out so early with this starting lineup that it's cemented in stone, No, that's not the case. He's just coming out with common sense first and then he'll adjust. So now shifting things over to today's press conference. What's the overall vibe you got from JJ Redick after having heard him talk pretty extensively for the last 2 days now? But I think for me, and I've said this in the past, and I'm going to quote myself on Twitter just because it's easier, but I still think JJ Redick can come off a little podcast, too podcasty, like he's always on when he speaks. And it's almost like he workshopped these answers in the mirror beforehand. And that's all fine. The thing that I can actually get over that really quickly because from everything that JJ Redick has said and everything that I've heard about what he's been doing this offseason, he has really worked his ass off and he has been in the trenches with these guys in the facility this offseason. And I'm talking about in the trenches with the Exhibit 10 guys like Quincy Oliveri, Kyler Kelly, whoever is willing to spend their time this offseason to get in that extra work. JJ Redick has been in there. And so I really appreciate that. It may be mildly annoying to hear how sort of affected he may be a little bit in these interviews, but I have to understand that he's transitioning from podcast JJ Redick and being on ESPN JJ Redick to being a coach, and he's probably going to get a little bit more authentic and genuine further on down the line. But having said that, I think the most interesting new update and tidbit that we got from today's presser came from Rob Pelinka when he updated us on Jared Vanderbilt's health status. And the last episode, you had brought up Vando's injury and said that you were personally pretty depressed about the whole situation and that you'd probably be depressed once Rob Pelinka gave us an update today. And well, that update was quite sobering indeed, because it turns out Jared Vanderbilt not only got surgery on one foot, he got surgery on both feet, Tommy. So now we clearly know why JJ Redick was so able to confidently give a definitive answer on his starting lineup to start out this season. So, what are your thoughts on now that we have a little bit more info into Jared Vanderbilt's health status? Yeah, what are your thoughts on him having surgery on both feet? And apparently he had surgery right after the season ended. and then was further advised to get a cleanup surgery on his other foot since he would be out of commission for a while anyways. Rob Pelinka stated that they are anticipating that he might be ready for the start of the season, but that between now and the start of the season, there's going to be ramp up time, even if he is able to partake in any training camp or preseason. But to me, that all just means that we cannot rely on Jared Vanderbilt to start this season.
Yeah, so I think, yeah, to give myself credit to my earlier point, I was actually depressed. I read the future. I was depressed. I ended up being depressed. It's in some ways, it's like, nothing really changes. I guess there's an angle of viewing this as like, in some ways it's worse than what we thought because it was actually two surgeries and both of his feet are messed up. In some ways it doesn't really change because provided that, you know, he sticks on this like same recovery timeline, I guess it doesn't really change anything in some ways. But I think it obviously helped JJ make a more confident decision without needing to see these guys practice, certainly, and see which group fits, because we know that Vando's not going to be an option, and that was really the only battle in the starting five that made sense to us anyway. I mean, other people have thoughts on D'Angelo or whatever, but that was really the only battle that was probably going to happen in training camp if Vando was fully healthy. It's I don't know. I've had a little bit more time to reflect on the Vando stuff, and my ultimate take is if Vando ends up playing 70 games this season, and we had to deal with him missing 5-6 games in the beginning of the year, and maybe a few sporadic games here and there to rest the foot or whatever, that's fine. That ultimately that it all worked out. I just I worry a little bit about how he is going to find, I don't know. It is going to be an adjustment for everyone on the team. And I worry, with him doing another season coming in off of injury with a completely new scheme on both ends, it's not just, is he going to be ready game one of 82? It's how long after he is ready is he going to be able to get enough reps in his limited minutes off the bench to get fully up to speed? And so that's where it's like that's where the whole not being ready for the season actually ends up really being worse than it sounds, because it's not about when he plays the first game. By the time he plays his first game, he's going to be a month and a half behind everybody else. And that's just going to take time. And we're lucky in the sense that we do have other options. We have Rui, who should arguably have been the starter anyway. But he's going to be starting. He's going to be soaking up a fair amount of minutes. And Vando can sort of ease himself into it. But, how quickly can he find that off the bench? Because that's really where the time suck is going to come. It's not just going to be he played 70. He only missed the first few weeks. He played 75 games this year, but it's like, did he have 20 games where he was like getting up to speed and was basically useless? I don't know. Those are the issues with injury. It's not just like, NBA 2K, like his injury is like gone and all his stats went back to normal and you just plug him in. It's like, there's a lot more here, and it is amplified with a new system on both ends and a completely new coaching staff.
Yeah, I think the biggest question is how far does this put him behind the eight ball now? Even if he's quote unquote ready to start the regular season, I think we just naturally have to bake in like a month long ramp up process for Jared Vanderbilt, right? And yeah, it's just unfortunate and it's a little bit ridiculous. This is a podcast for another day, but I find it so ridiculous, Tommy, that we did not know that he had surgery on either foot in general,
Yeah.
and now he apparently had surgery on both feet. Like,
Yeah.
I feel like if the Lakers had said this outright, they would have been in better standing with the fans, because at least we would have known. Because up until this point, we were under the impression that Jared Vanderbilt held off on surgery and only got it recently. Apparently he did it at like when the season ended, which makes a lot more sense. Why didn't they just tell us this from the get go? Anyways,
I
that
mean, I
is a
think
pod.
on that point, I will say that just really quickly, we don't know, and I certainly don't know what the rules and regulations are about what a team can disclose without the consent
Sure.
of a player. So I like maybe Jared Vanderbilt
Sure.
was the one who didn't want to say anything. I have no idea.
That's fair. That's fair. It's just, yeah, it's just kind of wild that we have been in the dark for this long. But yeah, now we know double surgery for Jared Vanderbilt. You get a surgery on that foot, you get a surgery on the other foot, as Oprah would say. Anyways, why don't we take it to break? When we return, let's talk about some other tidbits that we learned about in today's presser. So we will catch you guys after the turn. All right, so we are back. Tommy, the other thing that I found interesting about what JJ Redick said today was, and you guys knew this was coming as the D'Angelo Russell podcast, but the thing that I found the most interesting about what JJ Redick said was apparently D'Angelo Russell was the player he talked to the most this offseason out of anyone in the roster, even throughout free agency, which is particularly intriguing because a bunch of fans, I would maybe even call them D'Lo haters, kind of overreacted to JJ Redick's first introductory presser as a head coach, and they just wanted to read the tea leaves so deeply that JJ Redick didn't mention D'Angelo Russell at all, which meant that D'Angelo Russell was definitely off the team. And I always thought that was ludicrous. And my argument has always been it's not that I'm arguing that the Lakers aren't long for D'Angelo Russell. He's on an expiring contract. Of course, they're not long for him. My argument has been JJ Redick not saying anything about D'Angelo Russell is not an indicator whatsoever that he has no plans for D'Angelo Russell this upcoming season or that the Lakers don't value him at all. You know what I mean? And so just to hear JJ Redick affirm what we had been surmising this offseason when, a few podcasts ago, we had talked about how are we the ones taking crazy pills right now? Because don't you think that JJ Redick would have had the discussion with Rob Pelinka or even D'Angelo Russell himself that there may be use for a player who had the best single season 3-point shooting year of any Laker in franchise history? Don't you think JJ Redick is probably don't you think his gears are turning in his head regarding how he can utilize that type of 3-point heavy volume player? And so he kind of affirmed all of our thoughts with his presser today when he talked about not only did he talk about D'Angelo Russell having a major role on this team, which sounds just like general coach speak. A lot of people are saying, what else would you expect JJ Redick to say? It's a week out from training camp. He's just trying to be PC. He knows D'Lo is going to be his starting point guard. He's just trying to blow smoke up his ass. And I'm like, I'll tell you what he probably shouldn't say. He shouldn't say that I spoke to D'Angelo Russell the most out of any player this offseason. That's something you can totally leave out if you were just trying to be PC. He could have just said, D'Angelo Russell has been very professional this offseason. Whenever he's come into the facility, he's worked hard, and I really like his mentality. He could have ended it there, Tommy. But no, JJ Redick said, I have been talking to D'Angelo Russell throughout even free agency. We have talked about how to integrate him into this roster and make sure that he has another career season. And then he goes on to talk about, you know, just his professionalism, his leadership, et cetera, and that he is thrilled. He said thrilled twice, Tommy, to be coaching D'Angelo Russell. But yeah, so what are your thoughts about JJ Redick clearing the air about D'Angelo Russell on this roster? While I do think it's partially PC coach speak, I think Redick went above and beyond that. And I know some Lakers fans are even going to use that and do the mental gymnastics with that notion and say that, oh, JJ Redick's overcompensating at this point. So I don't know. Fans are going to believe what they want to believe about D'Angelo Russell, especially about D'Angelo Russell. But what are your thoughts about JJ Redick actually going out of his way to highlight D'Angelo Russell?
So I think on this one, I kind of go back to the Galaxy Brain, era. The Galaxy Brain era is over comment. From the moment JJ Redick became head coach, one of the first things he said was he's very focused on how to keep the ball out of LeBron's hands most of the game because he needs to save his energy for fourth quarters and for the end of the season. That was like one of the first things he said. And for some reason, notwithstanding that, everyone still ran away with let's just trade D'Angelo for Dorian Finney-Smith and be done with it. Right? Like leaving us with, by the way, like Austin, who's like a pseudo combo guard / we're trying to kind of give him more point guard skills, but it's very much in development. Let's trade like literally the only true point guard we have. I mean, Gabe Vincent is like a more developed Bronny James, right?
Yeah.
He's like he can do like very very basic point guard things, but nobody is signing Gabe Vincent to run your offense. In fact, like Gabe Vincent has most value on a team like us, or like, he came from the Heat, obviously, where it's like you have so many other playmakers and creators that you don't really you need your point guard to play defense and shoot threes, and you don't really care if they can like run the offense like Chris Paul, right? So the thing about D'Angelo is like, not only does he check that box for JJ, which JJ, again, like I said, that was one of the first things he mentioned. But he also is the best three-point shooter that we have. And, we're obviously going to be shooting more threes than we shot last year. Another thing that JJ's mentioned multiple times. And so, I just put this, again, all in the kind of the same bucket. I mean, like, again, it's a profession. All these guys are professionals. For some reason, until like recent years, it has never been the case that people are so focused on who's on an expiring contract. It's like, people almost view this stuff as like, well, we signed this guy to a 3-year contract. Year 3, if it was a bad contract, year 3 is like a waste, and I can't believe we gave him 3 years. If it was a good contract, we might as well trade him in year 3 because we're not going to be able to keep him. It's like, what even is an expiring? Like, not every expiring contract has to have value beyond the output on the court. And there is not a player in the NBA making D'Angelo Russell's salary, and certainly not another point guard who is accessible to us via trade, who would be better at that price point and could do more than what D'Angelo can give. And so the Galaxy Brain era is over. We have a coach who understands common sense. And he looked at this roster, and probably, the reason he was talking to D'Angelo so much is because he knows D'Angelo Russell is the third best player on this team, and it's not even really close, despite what a lot of folks want to think.
At least in the regular season, but yeah.
At least in the regular season. And, he knows how important D'Angelo is going to be, particularly on a team. Yeah, we're bringing a lot of continuity from prior years compared to, earlier in the decade, or last decade, right? But we're also bringing in 2 veteran stars who, had a long summer with the Olympics. Yeah, they've had some time to recover, but not like a typical full off season. We don't know what those guys are going to look like out of the gate right away, and they're going to need their time to ramp up. I imagine LeBron is not pushing himself the same way he has in prior years because he had the whole Olympics to deal with. D'Angelo is going to be as important, if not more important, for us this year than he was last year, and I don't want to say anyone with a brain could see that, because I don't, I get that there are like differing opinions, but like, again, in the context of this roster, with the types of moves we had, flexibility to make and all of those factors, like, it was obvious, it should have been obvious to anyone looking at the list of players that this is somebody who should be prioritized, by the coaching staff. And it seems like JJ has gotten there. And to his point, it's like the conversations have revolved around D'Angelo having the best year of his career, because that behooves everybody. If he does have the best year of his career, sort of like last year, remember we said like he has to have a really good year, and it behooves everybody. If he does have a really good year, that means we did well, and that means he is going to get his next contract that he wanted. Now, the market, conditions dictated a situation such that, he didn't get the contract that he was hoping for, notwithstanding the fact that he had a good season. But it's even more highlighted, I think, this year. Like, he is truly an expiring contract. He doesn't have that opt-in potential. He knows he needs to play well, and we know we need him to play well. Our interests are so heavily aligned that it's crazy, to just willy-nilly, crazy to me to just willy-nilly suggest that swap him out for any one of these number of other guys who just fills a role and is not going to be the third best player on your team, when what we can get out of D'Lo this year is potentially a lot, right? And this guy literally has been an all-star in his career. So, and was an all-star for us, I would argue, last year. So I think it's all just
Yeah.
common sense stuff, and I'm glad he said it out loud.
It's very refreshing to hear. Again, fans were connecting the wrong dots, Tommy, with D'Angelo Russell. They were connecting all the dots of he's finally off my team when it should have been JJ Redick, one of the best movement three-point shooters in NBA history, with the Laker who just had the single season record for most three-pointers made in Lakers history. You'd think they'd connect those
Right.
dots, right? But they haven't. Anyways, my last
Right.
question for you, and sorry we didn't end up ping-ponging this back and forth, but I wanted to get your thoughts on the general vibe of this press conference from both Rob Pelinka and JJ Redick's standpoint. And we can bake into this question what Rob Pelinka said about potentially trading two of the firsts for quote unquote sustained success. Um, Before I talk about that, I'm interested to hear your thoughts on this, and then something that we've intimated at in the past. But from what JJ Redick said last night in the Low Post podcast and what he said today, along with what Rob Pelinka said today, I heard a lot of process over results talk, a lot of journey over the final destination talk, a lot of we believe but we'll see talk. So I guess I'll kind of just say the quiet part out loud now and say that it sounds like the Lakers are setting themselves up pretty well for the long term. But as far as LeBron's short term goals to win a championship next year, it seems like everyone's in a we'll see mode, and that the onus is going to be placed once again on LeBron James and Anthony Davis to really push that agenda this year, even though I think they are going to make some sort of deal mid-season. Because I think one thing that Rob Pelinka said that not enough fans are talking about when he mentioned, yeah, we're willing to trade two firsts for a player that gives us sustained success, which again sounds like the most obvious answer, but people are still nitpicking that statement. I understand why. It's Rob Pelinka. But not enough people are focusing on the second line that he said, where he mentioned, we're also looking at trading one of the firsts for a marginal upgrade. So for me, that means something because it's not just two firsts or nothing, or two firsts for a superstar long term sustained success or nothing. It's no, actually, we're going to make a marginal upgrade with one of these firsts if the right deal comes along. So baking that into the overall vibe of sounds like a lot of process over result stuff, which I understand because they're just now building the foundation of this culture moving forward. But yeah, what are your thoughts on all of that kind of, it seems to butt heads against what LeBron James and Anthony Davis are trying to do this season to win a championship?
So I took Rob's comments to basically, you talk about how to say things in a PC way, right? Rob has a reputation that he really needs to get back in order in the NBA. I personally took his comments like just so simply to mean we don't want to end up in a Brooklyn Nets, Katie Kyrie situation. We don't want to end up in you could argue Phoenix Suns current situation. We don't
Hmm.
want to end up in a situation where we're completely gutting the future of the franchise for the next 2 years. I wouldn't take it really as anything more than that. And he just like stopped a half step short of calling out all the teams that have done that in the last couple of years. Um, I think, like we've discussed before, I think building for a championship and building for the future with the current roster that we have, I think those two ideals can be consistent because I think we have guys in that mid to late 20s range, Rui, Austin. I mean, honestly, even D'Lo. We've got obviously Connect and Max who are younger, and we've got like a lot of guys who we can use in the future but also help us now. And I don't know how I took those comments, right? I think I can see how a lot of fans would take the general tone of what JJ and Rob sort of said, and especially Rob said today, as sort of conceding we might not be there, or setting itself up to like say like, well, it's like we want to win but we also want to win consistently in the future. You could view that as giving himself an out. I really view it more as like counter to what we saw last year. I think last year
Mm.
there was a little bit too much, and maybe part of this was Ham and just like his style, but there was a little bit too much, I think, overconfidence about like how strongly we closed the prior year. We obviously made it to the Western Conference Finals, which was extremely unexpected that season. And so it like almost felt like everybody just thought that we would, and I thought that the tone of everything they said was kind of like that. Like we would just show up day one and ride that momentum and keep, be the number one team in the league, because that's the pace we were playing at, and there was nothing that was going to slow us down. I sort of actually prefer the approach that these guys, took this year. I like the idea of when they were asked, like, so what are you going to do about this? And, they're like, Erie, how do you think this plan is going to work? And it's all sort of like, we'll see.
Mhm.
I think they have a reason to be confident about where the roster stands for over the course of an 82 game season, meaning like, of course we need to get Vando and Wood back. There's no question about that. Um, but we were 3 wins short of the team that made the finals from the West last year. And I'm not saying that a 50-win team is going to make the finals this year, but I think from that perspective, it's not unfair to say we can't possibly be that far off just based on that and knowing how many games we left on the table last year,
Mhm.
particularly early in the season. Um, and so I view it more as like quiet optimism, maybe a quiet confidence this year compared to last year. It's like I really do think they like the fans can go crazy and go off the rails with stuff, but I really do think they are viewing things as like Jeremy Grant as an upgrade over Rui is not worth 2 first-round picks. Rui, if that's the price, Rui should be enough. You know what I mean? And
Mhm.
I think they're viewing sort of everything through that lens. And so I don't think Rob is being shady with the way he's speaking about this stuff. I think he's being as transparent as he can be without literally naming the players and the offers that were on the table, which would be
Yeah.
pretty unprofessional. And we can all read between the lines. He knows that we all see the tweets, right? It's sort of like we've taken a step forward from like the Mitch Kupchak, Jim Buss era, where it's like those guys just pretended that like nothing in the media was actually happening. It felt like most of the time, and Rob knows that we see all the rumors, we see all the tweets, and he knows that we're probably thinking of those rumors and tweets when he says these things.
Mhm.
And I think that's I just think it's all sort of consistent, and I think it's like a cautious optimism about how things can go, and all
Yeah.
sort of tempered by this overall attitude of, but you know what, let's wait and see, and we will adjust as necessary, which again I think is a much better approach than saying like these are the guys that went to the Western Conference Finals, so you know how it's going to go this year, which I feel like is how it was last year.
Yeah.
And so yeah, I don't know, that's sort of my overall point. I've seen a lot of people say like, I'm optimistic about this season, and then people quote them and say like, is this from last year? And and I get that. I get people had similar sentiments last year, and that's why I view it as like more of a quiet, like, we think that the changes we have made on the fringes are going to make a tangible difference on the court in a way that will produce extra wins. And we don't think we were that many wins behind the top teams in the West last year. And I think that's totally fair.
Yeah. And I think that Rob Pelinka's "we'll see this year" is a legitimate "we'll see" because we actually have maneuverability with our assets this season. Like this is not a Russell Westbrook situation where we are literally hamstrung with a $47 million deal and we have to make sure that whatever deal we get has to fulfill three or four different things with this one salary spot. Like we now have built up, and this is the reason why they are organically trying to sort of build up this or farm system with like youth development and whatnot. We now have different tiers for we now have different tiers for a lot of things, but even with regards to our assets, we have expirings this year: D'Angelo Russell, even Cam Reddish, Jackson Hayes, Christian Wood come the trade deadline. You can include JHS in there as well, and we've got young guys that if they show anything by midseason, teams might be calling up for Max Christie. Again, not to say that we're trying to ship him off, but the Lakers, when they say we'll see, I believe them because I can see the maneuverability that they have and the flexibility that they have with the assets that they now have compiled. I understand why people are skeptic about them ever pulling the trigger because we just came off of a summer and a trade deadline where they did nothing. I understand that, but for me, I'm just looking at what the Lakers have in their asset war chest and the circumstances that may make themselves available. And I kind of believe Rob Pelinka. So again, I'm not trying to hold water for Rob Pelinka. I think you and I both still think that Rob Pelinka is elite mid at his job. I wish that he would get a GM, but I don't know. Given everything he said with JJ Redick, given everything JJ Redick said about how excited he is to build things from the ground up, and even just the attention to detail with which they are approaching player development with their G League coach, and I'm buying it. You almost have to compartmentalize two things, okay? Like I understand it sucks to not be talking about championship and being 100% gung ho about we are charging towards a championship this season. But at the same time, I am also hearing what I want to hear about a franchise that is finally starting to be serious, Tommy, about quote unquote long term sustained success. Because this is something that Rob Pelinka has said pretty much every year, but it's always felt like empty words. But for the
Yeah.
first time, it sounds like these guys are actually in the trenches trying to make this happen. And it's just funny that it's pushing up against this, sort of angstiness from the fan base who just want to see this team win a championship when kind of honestly, the practical, realistic response that sounds like an excuse that Rob Pelinka and JJ Redick have been saying is if we do right by the process, the championship will come. So, any last words or thoughts on this presser or anything else you wanted to bring up?
Yeah, I think the last thing I'll say is, Rob's wait and see stuff. I'm sure people are getting tired of it. I just like it's not atypical, right? It's like I think a lot of teams sort of have this attitude of like, you know, we like if we didn't think that this team was good enough to win games, we wouldn't have put this team together. I mean, we most of the guys here we signed, we didn't just like fall ass backwards into this, right? It's like in recent years we've signed these guys. So we believe in these guys and we believed in them last year and it didn't work out. But I think, there it we can't you can't, concurrently hold the view, in my opinion, that Darvin Ham was a completely inept coach, but also firing him and replacing him with a coach that, at least by the way he speaks and seems to think about things, is clearly going to be superior. You can't concurrently think that that's not going to make a difference, right? Darvin Ham was, if you watch the games last year, he was so affirmatively bad, and I don't think people remember, right? It's like we finished 23-10, or our record was 23-10 with Rui in the starting lineup or whatever it was. And even in that stretch, how many games we needed you know, historically good 3-point shooting performances or all world performances by LeBron and AD to carry us to wins. And you could say that's because of a lack of talent on the roster. I would say that the Dallas Mavericks don't have 5 All-Stars. Maybe Boston has 5 All-Stars starting for them. Most other teams don't, right? And so it is the case that we got all of these guys on this team together because we think that they can fit in a certain way. The coach that we had last year clearly didn't realize what we thought that we, could do with this roster. So, it's not just minor changes here, right? It's like completely revamped coaching staff, no holder hovers, not even Phil Handy. Like you said, new G League coach who has a strong mind for player development and comes from the Quinn Snyder tree. New health personnel, including the team doctor, who's has one of the most insane resumes I've ever seen. And it's just every aspect of it, even the way JJ was talking about his development pods or what. I mean, it's just stuff
Yep.
that we haven't ever had before. And so this, to your point, it really, maybe I just said the point you put very succinctly in a lot more words, but this year's wait and see is different in the sense that like things have significantly changed. It's not like the Westbrook wait and see where we knew what it was going to be and all we
Yep.
changed was the coach, and for some reason we thought that like that was just going to like fix the fit. It's like we have less roster fit issues than we did with that Westbrook roster. You could point to other issues, but I think the issues that we had last year were all correctable, and I think it's a fair perspective to take that like, well, we've corrected those, so how about we see if the corrections work, and then we'll
Yeah.
go from there. And notwithstanding that, he was still, they've all been reasonable. I think in terms of like always looking to make a roster upgrade, not necessarily conceding that we think this is the best possible team we could have. It's I think everything they say makes a lot of sense, and I'm willing to give this group a shot because I, every time I hear JJ talk, I get more and more confident about
Mhm.
how he's going to be able to impact the product on the floor, and so I'm willing to see what does it look like to use Rui Hachimura in a system that makes sense, and use him in a logical way, and what is it going to look like to not put Austin in ridiculous situations, and like we did early, especially early last season where he's turning it over 5 times a game and like can't get into a rhythm. Like I'm willing to see like, how we can fix the team defense with this starting five, because JJ alluded to several ideas they have to, sort of win on the margins with that group. And I just feel like there's so much more emphasis this year on all of these, what, a lot of people consider to be fringe stuff. And again, if you're not optimistic, just contrast everything I just said with Pat Bev's comments a few weeks ago, where he was like, I had to tell Darvin Ham that we had to practice more because, that like, again, like that
Yes.
was from a guy who's going to be honest and just say what it was. And, this guy literally came out and said, he had to tell a professional NBA coach that the players had to tell the coach that they needed more time to practice because Ham's philosophy was like, we got the guys and we'll win, So we've taken such a significant step forward in all of these areas that, kind of folks wanted us to clean up, and we'll see. Maybe this is all nonsense and JJ is just like the ultimate, snake oil salesman, and none of this is going to work. But I think it's worth waiting and seeing this time.
Yeah, and I think the new blood from the coaching staff right on down the line is very palpable. That energy and excitement of them, just like as JJ Redick mentioned, they are sickos. It seems like this coaching staff is locked in. And that stuff, that's a trickle down effect from the top that's going to affect the Lakers players, And to your point about Darvin Ham, Tommy, we are talking about a Darvin Ham who did not play the starting unit that JJ Redick is about to start from day one of this upcoming season. He did not even play those 5 players together before January 21st last season, Tommy. 0 minutes in any sort of within a game, in any game until January 21st. That's the type of ineptitude we are trying to fix, and that I think JJ Redick is off to a good start in fixing. So the only thing that I think JJ Redick was very evasive about was the big man question, but I think he was evasive on purpose because that is still a work in progress, obviously. And JJ Redick has said we are looking for a big bruising big man, and he was kind of coy about skirting around that question that Eric Pincus tossed to him. So that's the one question where I was like, come on, JJ, we know you're BSing here. But I do think that they are very much still looking for that big bruising big man. Otherwise, why did we sign Christian Coloco to a 2-way deal? So other than that, I really like the tidbits that came out of this presser, including they mentioned Max Christie a lot. They mentioned that it sounds like Max Christie will be a very integral part to this team's rotation. He'll probably be the main backup too, but they also mentioned that he would be used as a wing player a lot as well. So we'll see how that all shakes out. But with that said, good start for JJ Redick. And yeah, we will have more once training camp happens and starts next week, which is insane. And then we have like Lakers basketball on Friday, I believe. So yeah,
Yeah, that's
buckle up.
crazy.
Here it comes. Here are the 2024-25 Run It Back Lakers with Coach Podcast at the helm. With that said, thank you guys for listening. Follow us on Twitter at Lakers Legacy Pod. Give us a subscribe on YouTube at Lakers Legacy Pod as well, and give us 5 stars on the Apple Podcast app and Spotify. And with that said, Tommy, I will catch you later.
Peace.
See ya.